What's up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here. Thank you, as always, for tuning in on this episode of Best Served Young, a very new channel for us. School gardens, youth education, lunch programs will be the focus on this. And we have the Renegade lunch lady with us, Ann Cooper, who is the Director of Food Services for Boulder Valley School District, as well as the founder of the Chef Ann Foundation based in Boulder, Colorado. Ann, thank you so much for taking some time.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine.
All right, we're going to talk clearly about school lunch programs, which has been your mission for a long, long time. We're also going to talk about school gardens very specifically because we feel that there's an opportunity for chefs, for restaurants to become a bigger part of that ecosystem, which is why we've launched this channel, Best Served Young. It's why we wanted to talk to Ann Cooper, who's been leading in that space for a long time. So before we get into the story a little bit more, give us just the definition. What can people expect from the work that you're doing with Boulder Valley School District as well as with Chef Ann Foundation?
Well, I've actually been a chef, cooking a chef for 46 years now. I started out as a white tablecloth chef. I worked on cruise ships. I worked all over this country. I worked all over the world. Did catering for 20,000, had my own restaurant, and went from all of that 20 years ago into school food. And I started in a private school in New York and was in Berkeley, California at the school district there. Now I'm in Boulder. And in Boulder, we do everything from scratch, or we certainly did before COVID.
Sure.
Everything from scratch. Salad bars in every school, organic milk, worked with farmers, no hormones, no antibiotics. So talking about school food, I think we have some of the best school food in the country. And 10 years ago, I started my own foundation to help school food professionals and school districts all across the country serve healthy scratch-cooked food to all our kids.
And talk about the transition. You said, 20 years ago, you're a gamer, clearly. Like, there's credibility, there's street cred when it comes to us as chefs. You've done the big events, you've had the restaurant, you've been in the grind and the hustle of the kitchen. So we really respect that a lot. You made the transition, or the pivot, as everyone's calling it right now. What was that for you? What was the moment, the catalyst that said, I'm going to go from being kind of this more prototypical chef to a chef that's having impact when it comes to school programs and going to the private school in New York?
So I really was known for a long time as being into sustainability. I was one of the chefs, who...
Before that was cool, right?
Before it was cool. Before it was even a word. Farm to table didn't exist, and I was kind of doing it. And I got really known for it. And, many, many years ago, there was a time when there was one chef from every state invited to cook at the White House. And I was the chef from Vermont. So, big fish, but very small pond. And it kind of put me on the map for sustainability. And as I worked through sustainability, and I wrote 4 books, one was called Bitter Harvest. And the founder of a school in New York, Courtney Ross, and it was the Ross School in East Hampton, really was into sustainability, was starting this school to change education in America, and had her team call me up and say, will you come be our chef? And I literally looked at the phone and went, what, me, lunch lady? I was too cool to do something like that.
Right.
They said, come and see us. And I went down and saw this prototype of a place where one of the core pillars was going to be healthy food and teaching kids. And it changed my life.
So why did you take that? It's easy to say no. You look at your phone or you look at your email, whatever that was at that moment, you say, this is just not me. I'm a restaurant chef. I'm cooking at the White House, like cooking at a school. Like, I'm not going to slop food onto a cafeteria tray. Like, that's not me. Why did you take that meeting, which changed everything for you?
They just said, you have to come and see it, and you won't believe it. And you get to build the program. You have full creative direction. I met Mrs. Ross, Courtney, and we really hit it off. And all of a sudden it felt like, from catering backstage to the Grateful Dead and parties to 20,000 to cooking on cruise ships, all of that knowledge, plus my real basis in sustainability and farm to table, again, before there was such a thing.
Yep.
I thought, wow, I could bring it all here, and maybe it's time to make a difference.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. The reason that I ask and kind of drill down on that is coming up in the industry, being of the chef-driven concepts, the progressive concepts, wanting to like push the envelope when it comes to the food side. It's easy for us to dismiss everything else as not being a chef. And I think in today's age, especially, we recognize that if you're feeding a community, it's the only thing that matters. We're recognizing that right now as restaurants have turned into community centers, truly, and feeding humans is the only thing that matters. So I wanted to hover on that for a moment because I really appreciate that. I think it's important to recognize you can be of service at a high level as a chef in all kinds of different channels and avenues and ventures now than ever before. So explore kind of your own idea of that. If you're watching this, I think it's important. And she's changing the game 100%. Now, chef is very important. It's the name of your foundation. 2011 is when I first came across you. I saw a TED Talk, saw multiple after that, and you were wearing your chef coat. It looked and felt very different than everything else I had seen from TED because, it's technology, education, I can't remember what the D is, but it was very much like tech focused. It's very entrepreneurial. And you were like, I'm out here to cook for people in a chef coat. Why was the way that you presented your message maybe as important as your message was?
I think that when I went from a kitchen, like in a kitchen and in hotels and in restaurants, a chef is in a chef coat. That's especially, 20, 30 years ago. Now, maybe there's a lot of different ways to dress. But then, you wore chef coat. That's what you did. When I came out of culinary school, it was all about the chef coat. And when I went into big business, whether it was hotels or whether it was schools, especially as a young woman, I wasn't necessarily taken as seriously. But when you have a chef coat on in a TED Talk, in a business meeting, in a bank meeting, people call you chef. All of a sudden, you are given this cred that you might not have in a business suit. And I always, I don't have one on today, but I always speak in chef coats. I go to meetings in chef coats. I go to work every day in a chef coat. And even though we're in a school, I have 8 chefs working for me, and every one of them wears a chef coat every day, all day.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I've even been reflecting on that as I've gone from being a restaurant chef and an owner to being more on the media side of this and storytelling around what we're passionate about. And I'm like, am I still chef? Even my handle says Chef Jessica Cummings, and I reconcile with that. But then somebody who I worked with at some point says chef to me, and it's almost like this term of endearment where you're a chef for life. Like you got to that point, you earned the credibility from your team, and forever henceforth you will be chef. So I appreciate that. And to your point, like people stand up a little taller. I don't know what it is when the chef coat, it demands a little bit of attention. So I appreciate you understanding the medium of communication and utilizing a tool that you have in your arsenal, which absolutely the chef coat is. That makes a lot of sense to me. Let's move forward a little bit to not today. There's a lot happening today I want to talk about, but the moment when you recognized the platform that you had. You're doing these TED Talks. You're in New York, Berkeley, now Boulder, like epicenters for moving kind of the needle when it comes to sustainability specifically. When did you realize that you had the breadth of responsibility and the platform to be able to impact thousands and thousands of people that you have? When was that moment? Was there a moment for you?
Yeah, it actually was probably the first time I was at the White House. And this was well before the Obamas. This is going back to probably 1990 when I was first there. And even though, as I said, I was just one, the chef from Vermont that came to cook at the White House, there were people there talking to us about food, about agriculture, about our belief that, good food wasn't something that came from far away and that we had to support farmers. And I think from the largest food system perspective, that's when I knew. And also, I guess, when my book, Bitter Harvest, came out, which was my 3rd book, and people really started to take seriously that a chef could really make a difference politically. Now, of course, you just take it for granted. There's so many chefs, there's Tom Colicchio, there's Jose Andres. I mean, there's so many of them that are making such a difference. But back then, not many people were talking about chefs in a political environment. And that really made a difference. Like, I felt like chefs should be making a difference.
Yes.
We are the experts on food. Nobody else really is. We're the custodians of the food supply. I mean, if there's going to be heirloom vegetables, like Dan Barber's Row 7, seeds,
yeah,
chefs who are going to help make that happen. And that's how it started for me.
I could not agree more. The chef has a new moniker. The chef, when somebody called you chef before, it was a term of endearment for the work that you had done in the kitchen with the food. Now I feel like we have a responsibility and an opportunity to have chef mean something political, much more powerful, and political not in the sense of politics, but food is political. It really is. So I think we need to recognize that, understand that, and the impact that we can have is massive because we have attention. We have the attention of the public because somehow chefs became cool. To your point, in the 70s and the 80s, like chefs were still, even in the 90s, were the help. And now chefs can go to the White House and they have a bully pulpit to speak to. So I really appreciate that. When did you become the Renegade lunch lady? When did you take that persona on?
So it was about 20 years ago. And when I kind of dropped out of that white table celebrity chef world, and I was doing an interview, first it was with the New York Times and then Atlantic magazine. And they were saying, well, what do I said, I'm not a chef anymore. I'm a lunch lady. And somebody quipped in the press, well, if you're a lunch lady, you're a renegade lunch lady. And I embraced it. I just said, great, that's what I'm going to be, because I'm not serving chicken nuggets and tater tots and canned green beans, and there's nothing going to be packaged. And all my food is going to be delicious and scratch cooked and healthy and with fresh fruits and vegetables. And it just stuck.
Did that give you a superpower? It feels like all of a sudden it's like the bat signal went up and you had this superpower. And also it keeps you, I feel like it keeps you tethered. Like if you're the Renegade lunch lady, you have to stay focused on what that mission was, because it was very idealistic of you, but also very practical. You had to do the work. So do you feel like Renegade lunch lady somehow is a superpower, or is it an anchor? Like, how do you look at it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think the work through the foundation and also through the school district keeps me really tethered to the mission. When we think about, like, every day now we read in the papers, COVID is just expanding, it's exploding. Are schools going back? Well, no, they're not in New York and Oakland and LA and San Diego. They're not in Houston. And even places where schools are going back, there may be a lot of processed foods or IW, individually wrapped foods.
Yes.
So how do you keep your focus on fresh fruits and vegetable and plant forward and scratch cooked and no processed, when we may be feeding kids on street corners and, anywhere? So, but it keeps reminding me every day. It's like, okay, even if it has to be packaged, how can it be the best it can be? And how do we get fresh fruits and vegetables to kids? And how do we not totally go backwards on what we've spent, all of these years getting positive change?
Let's go there. What are the top ticket items for you? Because I know that's a big part of the conversation. We can't go there because it's too expensive. It takes too much people power. We don't have the resources. The bandwidth isn't there. People don't care right now. They just want to survive this. Like, all of these things are at play. And so it's really easy to go the cheapest and the easiest route, which we know is not the route that you have paved for us. What are the top ticket items that you're pushing for, pushing back against? Like, give us a couple of the things that we need to be paying the most attention to. I know there's hundreds of things, but a couple things that practically we can be thinking about.
Well, one of the things is that we have to serve fresh fruits and vegetables, and they can't be processed. We have to get kids fresh fruits and vegetables. I think that's really important. And just because something has to be packaged, if it does, we're not going to go packaged in Boulder. But if you're in a district that has to, it still could be scratch cooked, and then it could be packaged if you need. So since March, our school district has been closed, and we've been handing out about 35,000 meals a week. But we're not doing individually packaged. We're actually doing raw ingredients and recipes. And we have a whole website set up so that parents can actually cook from the bags of food we're giving out. And not all school districts are doing that or can, but for us, it was important that, and we're still buying from our local farmers, and we're putting the farmers' fresh produce in the bags. And, you know, everything, you can just try, you know, and everyone's in a different place. So I don't want to say my way's better than other school districts. Everyone's under a lot of stress and strain right now. But as long as we keep thinking about how can it be the best it can be, and the freshest, and of course the most delicious.
Anybody who's in your district, is the lunchbox.org, is that where they can find out information about the program that you're feeding people outside of the schools? Like, where can people find more information?
That's actually food.bbsd.org, because that's the school district, and the lunchbox is my foundation. Understood.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk to chefs for a little while, right? Our people, our tribe, our band of rebels, the Island of Misfit Toys, the pirates on the pirate ship. Again, we're shifting the responsibility. It's not what's on the plate, it's who gets it to the plate, and it's what we do with the attention that we have and the ability to affect change within our communities, because people love what we do with the food. It's delicious, it has an impact. Restaurants, we see, are clearly the epicenter of culture and commerce in any community. We have an opportunity. So we want to connect chefs and restaurants more closely to schools. School gardens is one of the main places we see an opportunity, because there's a need for education around that. There's the opportunity for chefs to be involved with that food product and growing that product and educating the kids within the schools. So connecting all those dots. What are a couple of places you see opportunities there that you would call on chefs to kind of bring their tutelage, their skills, the attention, again, to that ecosystem? Talk to chefs for a little bit.
You know, I think that right now it's a little different, but if we look like just prior and just post to where we are in the midst of the pandemic, I would say that, you know, when Sam Cass was working with Michelle Obama, and I had the great fortune to work with both of them, you know, we had chefs from all over the country lining up to work with schools, and they could be helping with recipes or doing chef demos or working in the gardens. And I think that was really, really positive. And for me, I think what chefs can do, again, maybe post-COVID, is go in and be able to do demos. You know, when you walk into a cafeteria in a chef coat, and even all my staff who work in cafeterias are in a chef coat, but when you walk in, the kids, they've grown up now thinking chefs are superstars. We're celebrities. We're on TV. So they gravitate to you. And when guest chefs come into the cafeterias and make something or do a tasting, I mean, you know, in peach season, taste 4 kinds of peaches with the kids. They will taste, they will listen, they will talk to the chefs. And so whether you're going with kids into the gardens and the kids follow you there like the Pied Piper, or whether you're harvesting the food with the kids and going back to an area where you can cook it. I mean, all of these things are changing kids' palates, and we have to change kids' palates. I mean, the generation of kids in most schools in America today grew up on high fat, high salt, high sugar foods. And listen, as chefs, if we don't change that, we're going to be serving some kind of plastic food, because kids won't know what real food is. So it's super important for chefs to get involved. And again, the best ways to be a chef, it's not to try and necessarily change school food, because there's so many guidelines. It's not to go in and tell the lunch ladies how to cook something unless you're asked, and doing a class for them. But working with the kids, getting the kids to understand what things taste like, to taste things out of the garden, to taste deliciousness, to get outside their comfort zone. That's what's so important.
What you just said, very important. Again, I want to hover on this, because we can be a little dense in the industry sometimes, right? We get beat up on the line all the time. So I want to focus on this. we have to shift kids' palates or we're going to be serving plastic food. If you are at a place that's focused on sustainable ranching, you are vegetable forward in your concept, you want to be that progressive scene, you have to invest in the future of that opportunity, right? Because if kids today are bought in and say fruits, vegetables, like proteins that are sustainably ranched or farmed mean something to me, they're going to demand that when they are of the consumer age, when they are the ones coming, butts and seats we know are important in restaurants, they're going to be already bought in. You're not going to have to sell them on getting them away from box food because they, from a young age, have had that. So you have to pay attention to the fact that you are cultivating your future community, your future guests. I think it's a very important thing to think about because we don't want to be just serving plastic food. And if that's the expectation at a young age, it's going to be the expectation when they get older. So I really appreciate that as well. You mentioned some of the guidelines and things. I think we don't quite know how food gets into the school program. Like, how does food come potentially from a farm versus from a big box producer? Give us a little bit of understanding for that, because I think if we understand as chefs and farmers, and that's a big part of our ecosystem and audience as well, how we can help positively influence the kids, I get that. How can we, from a policy standpoint, from training within the school programs, administratively, access to food hubs, anything, what's top of mind that is important that we can have an impact on today and or coming out of COVID?
So working with farmers is really important, but it's not that easy for schools, right? Because schools buy on bid. There's all kinds of...
What does buy on bid mean?
So you have to have RFPs, requests for proposals. People will actually send you bids because it's government dollars. School food is highly, highly regulated. But most states have ways that you can buy direct from farmers. But it has to be a two-way street. So, in typical food service operations, think hotels, you're buying tomatoes, 5x7. So it's not even whether a tomato tastes good or not, it's how many fit in a box, So school food operators, a lot of people are still in that, like the typical way of buying something. And, tomatoes don't grow 5x7s unless that's what you're trying to do, which has nothing to do with flavor or sensory perception of that tomato. So figuring out how to work with farmers, and farmers aren't necessarily marketers. They're not necessarily good with the paperwork. They're not necessarily, they should be staying farming, So how you can work with them is really important. And for the chef to meet the farmer halfway, the chef in schools, instead of saying, well, this is the size tomato I want, or this is the count I want, or this is how I want it to be boxed. It's like, what's the best thing that you grow? How can you get it to us? When's the season you grow it? Do you need me to pick it up? Work with them. And I think from a chef's perspective, that's really important. This idea of big boxed food is, endemic in schools. First of all, we have USDA foods, also called commodity foods, where they send in, extra food that they haven't been able to do anything else with. They'll send it into schools, sort of cheap. So there's a big push in schools to use this inexpensive food, because typically a school lunch, I have about $1.25 to put it on a plate. And the chef friends I know, that's what it costs for an amuse, right? It's like, what are you kidding me? $1.25. And I have 5 things I have to offer: protein, whole grain, fruit, vegetable, and milk for $1.25. So there's this huge pressure to do things very inexpensively. But if you cook from scratch, if you work with farmers, you really can get great food on a plate for that much money.
Yeah, and the food value of that food is exponential in comparison. So I think that's an important thing to think about as well. Got a great question earlier from Cynthia Walters asking, what is the best way to convince teachers and administrators to conduct learning in outdoor spaces such as school gardens? I was very fascinated as we've rethought how many kids can be in a classroom, outdoors being clearly more safe. Have you seen any conversations of value? Is there any insights that you have there? I think that's a fascinating conversation, which again, if School Gardens is a good place that chefs can interact with the students, if there's more time spent outside, to me, it makes sense there's more opportunity to interact in that way. Have you seen anything moving the needle forward in those conversations?
Well, actually, COVID is moving the needle forward in those conversations, exactly because if we need 6-foot distance, if schools can only have half as many kids in a classroom, then certainly for this summer, early fall, there may be a lot of opportunity to get kids outside. Then it depends on where you live. Like in California, most of the, many schools don't even have cafeterias. All their kids eat outside.
Yeah.
But right now, I think it's a great time to push administrators. And I think there's been a lot of talk from teacher unions, and there was an article in the Times and the Post about, how do we get kids outside because it's the safest place. So that may just happen. And school gardens are a great place to have kids do learning.
Okay, the moral of the story there is push for it, because now is an opportunity more than ever, potentially. Right. Amazing conversation. Any last thoughts before we let you go? I really appreciate the work you've done to this point, inspiration you've given me personally and many, many other chefs, and the work happening today, because I know it's difficult work and important work as well. Any last thoughts for us?
Yeah, I would say for every chef out there, we need to really care about what kids eat. It should be a birthright in our country that every kid has healthy, delicious food in school and no kid is hungry. And as chefs, we can help make that happen.
I could not agree more. Now is the opportunity. Now we have the responsibility. And I think we're going to see what we're made of. I really believe that. I think COVID has exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities in the restaurant industry. It has also exposed the massive amount of humanity within people that are just wanting to be of service. It's not about the glitz and the glam and the foie gras and the caviar, which we grew up on and love in the industry. Absolutely. It's really about just feeding humans, taking care of your community. And I'm hoping that we take your lead a little bit more. So, Ann, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you being on.
My pleasure.
All right. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you too.
All right. Chef Ann Cooper. Unbelievable. If you know, you know. And if you don't, go check out TED Talks. Just Google it. Check out what she's done. The Renegade Lunch Lady. Lunch Lessons is a lot how those are branded as well. Just really inspired stuff. And I think it changed my perspective and the opportunity. Yet I went and supported and did some education with kids. It was not sustainable for me, though. I was interested in it. And a parent volunteer who came to my restaurant, asked me. I said, of course, I would love to. I had so much fun. And then I forgot about it. Their kid moved on to another school, whatever it might be. So we're really working on sustainable models, creating viable business potentially within ecosystem of School Gardens. More to come about that. So let's really, really focus on the opportunity that we have right now. Find relationships within schools, opportunities, and look to this channel. Best Served Young is going to be on every single Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, noon Mountain, 11 a.m. on the Pacific. We're going to be talking to people that work across this ecosystem of school gardens, youth education, lunch programs, and really find an opportunity. I think there is, and it always comes from conversations with humans. That's it for today. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you as always. Cheers.